Aston Martin is one of those names that has always stirred my imagination. Few marques in the world of motoring carry the same weight of history, prestige, and quiet confidence that Aston Martin does. For me, the name instantly evokes an image of a car that is equal parts gentlemanly and brutal, refined yet purposeful, and always unmistakably British. Its story is one of perseverance and passion, of small teams building world-class machinery against all odds. And while much of the public knows Aston Martin through its cinematic partnership with the James Bond films, there is far more depth to its legend than just the gadgets and glamour of the silver screen. The truth is, Aston Martin's spirit was forged long before it ever appeared in Goldfinger. It was born on race circuits, in engineering workshops, and in the hearts of men who believed that a grand touring car could be as elegant as it was fast. Before we get carried away with images of Sean Connery behind the wheel of a DB5, it's worth remembering that James Bond's first Aston Martin, at least in print, was not the DB5 but the DB Mark III. In Ian Fleming's 1959 novel Goldfinger, Bond drove a whisper gray DB Mark III, an understated color choice for a car that was anything but. The DB5, which came later in the film adaptation, may have become the icon, but in reality, the Mark III was the car that defined the transition between early post-war Astons and the sleek, high-performance models that followed. It was the bridge between eras, combining the raw racing DNA of the DB2/4 with the refinement and design cues that would shape the company's identity for decades to come. I've been fortunate enough to spend time behind the wheel of several DB Mark IIIs over the years, and of all the classic Astons, this is the one that resonates with me most. Maybe it's because, at 6'4", I actually fit comfortably in it, something that can't always be said for mid-century British sports cars. But it's more than that. The Mark III is the perfect blend of everything I love about Aston Martin. The precision of its engineering, the purity of its styling, and the undeniable sense of occasion it brings to even the simplest drive. When you slide into that leather-clad cockpit, grip the thin-rimmed steering wheel, and feel the weight of the long bonnet stretching ahead, you sense that this was built by craftsmen, not just assembled by technicians. The DB Mark III arrived in 1957 as the final evolution of the DB2 lineage, carrying forward the lessons Aston Martin had learned from years of racing at Le Mans and other endurance events. It featured an updated version of the Lagonda-designed straight-six engine, developed by none other than W.O. Bentley himself, which produced a respectable 162 horsepower in standard trim and up to 195 with the optional dual exhaust and higher compression ratio. Those numbers may not sound outrageous today, but in its time, the Mark III was considered properly fast, capable of topping 120 miles per hour with grace and stability. The car's tubular chassis, precise steering, and advanced, for the era suspension setup made it one of the best handling grand tourers of its day. But beyond the technical side, what makes the Mark III so special is its design. This was the first Aston Martin to wear what we now think of as the classic Aston grille, the one that would later define the DB4, DB5, and every model since. The grille, conceived by Bert Thickpenny, isn't just an aesthetic feature, it's an identity, a signature that instantly says Aston Martin even without a badge. The proportions of the car are beautifully balanced. Long nose, compact cabin, subtle tail. It's muscular yet restrained, elegant without being ostentatious. The DB Mark III represents that golden age of British design when beauty was measured in understatement and function dictated form. Now, the particular car that caught my attention, and the one I consider the pick of the day, is a 1959 Aston Martin DB Mark III being offered by a dealer in Astoria, Queens, New York. This example is among the later cars in the production run and, crucially, a factory left-hand drive. That's a big deal, especially for collectors and drivers in the United States, since most DB Mark IIIs were built for the UK market and thus right-hand drive. Only 551 were produced in total, making any surviving car a rarity, but a left-hand drive one is even more desirable. According to the seller, this car retains its matching number status, which means its chassis, engine, and gearbox are all original and correspond to the factory build records. For a collector, that kind of authenticity is gold. The car is currently finished in red over tan leather, a classic and handsome pairing, though it was originally delivered in the elegant color combination of elusive blue with off-white leather. Personally, I would enjoy it as is for a while, drive it to weekend events, savor it on open roads, and then someday restore it to its original hues. Returning a car like this to factory specification isn't just about aesthetics. It's a form of respect for history, and it often enhances both the car's story and its value. The seller also provides documentation from the well-known Aston Martin specialist, Steel Wings, detailing an engine rebuild and interior work. That's reassuring, because maintaining a car like this requires the touch of experts who understand its nuances. The straight-six engine is a masterpiece of mechanical art, smooth, torquey, and full of character when pushed. With the factory overdrive gearbox functioning perfectly, this DB Mark III promises to be an exceptional driver. It's not just a showpiece. It's a machine meant to be used, a car that still encourages spirited motoring in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Inside, the tan leather cabin exudes the sort of understated luxury that only hand-built British cars of the era seem to achieve. The seats have that lived-in patina that invites rather than repels. The dashboard, with its array of Smith's gauges and toggle switches, feels like the command center of a gentleman pilot rather than a car. It's an atmosphere that modern cars, with all their screens and software, simply cannot replicate. You feel part of the machinery here, not merely a passenger commanding it by wire. The paint, however, is showing its age, as the seller notes. There are signs of wear, chips, cracks, perhaps a bit of fading. But to me, that's part of the car's charm. A perfect restoration can sometimes erase the very soul that makes a vintage car special. This one, with its honest patina, tells its story proudly. Of course, when the time comes to repaint, bringing it back to its original elusive blue would not only do justice to its heritage but also enhance its market value. That color, in particular, flatters the DB Mark III's lines beautifully. It's subtle, sophisticated, and quintessentially Aston. Driving a DB Mark III is an experience that lingers with you long after you've parked it. There's a weight and precision to everything it does. The steering, unassisted but communicative, tells you exactly what the front wheels are doing. The clutch requires a firm but confident foot, and the gearshift, though long of throw, is wonderfully mechanical in feel. You can sense the connection between every component, engine, transmission, suspension, as though the entire car were carved from a single block of metal. It's not a car for rushing or distraction. It rewards patience, rhythm, and mechanical sympathy. At speed, it settles into a steady lope, the exhaust note a mellow growl that turns heads without shouting. It feels alive in a way modern cars rarely do. For all its sophistication, the DB Mark III was still very much a driver's car, not a boulevard cruiser. Its performance figures may seem modest now, but the sensation of speed, the sense of occasion, is magnified tenfold by its analog nature. Every input matters. Every journey feels intentional. It's the kind of car that makes you plan routes that avoid highways in favor of winding country lanes, the kind of car that makes you listen, to the road, to the engine, to yourself. The Aston Martin DB Mark III also occupies an interesting place in the company's lineage. It was the last of the Feltham Astons, built before production moved to Newport Pagnell. In a sense, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It bridged the handmade charm of the early post-war years with the more sophisticated, larger-scale operations that would produce the DB4, DB5, and beyond. The Mark III was, therefore, both a culmination and a prelude, a car that captured the spirit of the past while hinting at the future. Its exclusivity cannot be overstated. With just over 500 examples built, and far fewer surviving today in original specification, each DB Mark III is a piece of Aston Martin's soul. They rarely come to market, and when they do, they tend to be snapped up by collectors who appreciate both their historical significance and their drivability. This particular example, offered at $189,500, strikes me as a fair deal, especially given its provenance, condition, and documentation. In the world of classic Astons, prices can vary dramatically based on originality, color, and restoration quality. But at this level, you're getting an entry point into one of the most revered automotive brands in history. If you were to buy it and decide to repaint it, the cost would indeed be significant. A proper Concours-level respray on a car like this, done by a reputable shop familiar with Aston Martin construction, could easily run into the tens of thousands. But it's an investment, not an expense. When completed with care and accuracy, it could elevate the car's standing to a new level, perhaps even to the show fields at Pebble Beach, as I mentioned earlier. And yet, there's a strong case to be made for simply driving it as it stands. Cars like this are meant to be enjoyed, not imprisoned in climate-controlled garages. I often think about the people who built these cars back in the 1950s. They weren't robots or factory workers on a conveyor belt. They were craftsmen, artisans, engineers with pride in every bolt they tightened. When you open the hood of a DB Mark III and see the neatly arranged engine bay, the polished cam covers engraved with Aston Martin Lagonda, and the purposeful layout of components, you realize that this was built to endure. Every inch of it reflects care and purpose. That's part of why these cars continue to inspire such loyalty among their owners and admirers. The DB Mark III's connection to motorsport also adds to its legend. Though not as famous on the track as the DB3S or DBR1, it nonetheless benefited from the racing lessons those cars taught. Its braking and suspension systems were designed to handle the rigors of spirited driving, and the car's balance and composure are evident even today. When driven hard on a mountain pass or a quiet back road, the Mark III feels eager, alive, and utterly trustworthy. There's a rightness to its behavior that modern cars, for all their speed and precision, can't replicate. As a grand tourer, it also excels in comfort. The ride, while firm, is never harsh. The sound insulation, modest though it may be, still keeps wind noise to a civilized level. Long-distance journeys are entirely feasible, and the overdrive gearbox ensures relaxed cruising at highway speeds. It's a car that encourages travel, not merely from point A to point B, but for the sake of the journey itself. That's what grand touring really means. The joy of motion, the romance of the open road. When I reflect on what makes the Aston Martin DB Mark III so appealing, it's not just the specifications or the design. It's the feeling it gives you. It's the combination of history, craftsmanship, and personality that makes it so profoundly human. Every Aston Martin has a bit of that magic, but the Mark III captures it in its purest form. It's the car that set the stage for the DB4 and DB5, and yet it still retains the intimacy of the early cars. It feels like a bridge not only between generations of machines, but between eras of motoring philosophy. There's also something deeply satisfying about driving a car that's older than most of us and still capable of stirring the soul. The DB Mark III doesn't rely on speed to impress. It relies on presence. Park it anywhere and people stop to look. Not because it's flashy, but because it radiates substance. Its proportions, its stance, its aura. Everything about it whispers rather than shouts, and that's precisely what makes it timeless. So, would I buy this particular car? Absolutely, if circumstances allowed. I'd drive it regularly, care for it properly, and perhaps one day return it to its original elusive blue finish. I'd take it to local concours events, join a few vintage rallies, and above all, enjoy it for what it is. A true gentleman's sports car. One that blends performance, exclusivity, and style in a way few others can. The fact that it's a matching numbers example with documented history only sweetens the deal. For me, the Aston Martin DB Mark III represents the essence of what a classic car should be. It's not just a collectible, it's a companion. It asks something of you: patience, attention, respect, and gives back far more in return. It's a reminder of a time when driving was an art, not a task, and when beauty and engineering walked hand in hand. At $189,500, it may not be inexpensive, but in the world of classic Aston Martins, it's an attainable dream. For that sum, you get not just a car, but a slice of history, a work of art, and a ticket to an era of elegance and mechanical purity that will never return. If ever there were a car to embody the phrase, "a gentleman's express," this is it. And that's why, out of all the Astons I've driven and admired, the DB Mark III remains my favorite. It's the car that connects me to the brand's roots, to its heroes, and to the simple, enduring joy of driving. In a world of noise and novelty, the Mark III stands quietly apart, refined, confident, and eternal.